Hi, I'm Dr. Jerome Blackman, and I'd like to tell you about a course I'll be giving through the Object Relations Institute in New York City starting in October. It's an exciting course. It'll be a little different. It's about some modern psychoanalytic ideas regarding children at different stages of development. And in particular, what do we need to ask their parents during the initial interviews, and what has that got to do with how we're going to approach the parents and the child? Of course, we'll also talk about how to evaluate the child at each developmental phase. What's unique about the course is that it will be an integration of about 9 psychoanalytic theories. And I hope to present that in a way that you'll be able to understand it. In the past, there's been a huge amount of conflict among theoreticians regarding what happens at each stage of development. Conflicts between psychobiologists, attachment theorists, behaviorists, cognitive theorists, and of course, other developmental theorists and psychoanalytic theorists. And we could break the psychoanalytic theorists down to 7 or 8 different quote, schools of thought. So in this particular course, we'll start off with some overview of the different theories. And that would include basic mental functions like organization of thought, concentration, intellect, abstraction ability, reality testing, social skill, language usage, and in particular, ego interests, and some other things like that. And of course, at each stage of development, the child is going to be different. There are what we call age-appropriate levels the child should reach at each stage. And then we'll also look at control and delay capacities, such as impulse control, affect regulation, containing primary process, which I'll go into and explain to you in some further detail. Of course, we're going to spend a considerable amount of time looking at what is called object relations theories. And as you may know, there are many, many different conflicting ideas about this. There are interpersonal ideas. There are ideas about attachment and detachment. That would be, of course, Bowlby versus Selman Akhtar. And then we have an update of Margaret Mahler's ideas about separation and individuation. The updates in particular are done by Selman Akhtar, Harold Blum, and others. So we'll see how all of those interdigitate, and how does that connect with some of Kohut's idea about self-esteem regulation. What are the problems, both if the child is overly praised or not praised sufficiently? And of course, we won't leave out the effects of different types of abuse on children, namely sexual abuse, physical abuse, and emotional abuse, and neglect. Kathy Dring and I wrote a book about that a few years ago called Sexual Aggression Against Children. I've had a lot of experience with that particular problem. So each of the 10 lectures, which will be about 45 minutes, and then there'll be an equal amount of time for question and answer, so you can bring up your own cases and I'll discuss them with you. We'll look at what happens during pregnancy, the birth and the postpartum period. We'll look at the first year of life, also using some of the ideas of Renee Spitz and Beatrice Beebe. Then we'll take a look at separation and individuation from age 1 to age 3, and all the vicissitudes that go into that, including some of more modern ideas about toilet training. Finally, we get to the first genital phase, which has been expanded by Harold Blum, by Rona Knight, and Umberto Nakara, and others who have taken a look at what happens between ages 2 and 7, which is very complicated. It involves the beginning of fantasy life, ideas about reproduction and gender, and what happens to destructive, hostile thoughts. Then we'll take a look at latency, based mostly on Sarnoff's wonderful books. which in turn were based on the studies of Berta Bornstein, Ted Becker, and other people who contribute to the study of latency. During the school age years, we get a much greater number of parameters that we have to examine, but we can't forget that the postpartum period, pregnancy, postpartum period, first year of life, separation, individuation, and the first genital phase all left residues that affect what happens during latency, as well as now the teachers and coaches and parents, and how the parents discipline their kids and so on. When we get done with latency, we'll have a lecture about pre-adolescence, the very interesting phase described by Peter Bloss, particularly in his very good book called The Young Adolescent. And that can be a prolonged period or a very short period, because when puberty occurs is so extremely variable. So children may have a very, very short or no pre-adolescence, or they may have a very, very extended pre-adolescence. And what happens to object relations, sexual and aggressive and dependency needs, defensive operations, and conflict during all of that, and how much of that is based on what came before. Finally, we get to early adolescence, which has a plethora of things we need to look at, maybe 10 or 12 different parameters, all, of course, based on what came before. But now we have an influx of new experiences in the environment. We have the development of functions that weren't there before, like abstraction ability, like actual capacities for sexuality and hostile destructive aggression, actual capacities for love, and an expanded capacity for sublimated activities like sports, language, music, art, so on. Those are all tremendously expanded, where the children now can develop significant skill. And we look to see what inhibits or interferes with all of those things. We won't stop at the quinceañera, which is the 15-year-old phase that many Hispanic people think about. And we won't stop at age 13, which is where, of course, Jewish people have their kids go through a special ceremony. We're going to look at what happens during the whole period from puberty until about age 16. And then from 16 until who knows when, right? We have late adolescence. Hopefully by the early 20s, people are resolving adolescent conflicts about narcissism, closeness in relationships, how they use their executive function to make choices about spouses, how they use their executive function to make choices about their ambitions, and how to handle situations where they're under some sort of pressure, or what to do about it. Some people, of course, have extended adolescence. We see them at age 50 and they're still like teenagers. They're what Erwin Marcus, in his wonderful book, which is called Why Men Have Affairs, he described this type of guy as the adult teen, So we can have expanded adolescence or sometimes shortened adolescence. And what happens to identity formation as described by Erickson? What happens to the compromise formations that were described by Brenner? What happens to attachment? What happens to the management of closeness and distance and ambition? And of course, the work capacity, which is so important and can become inhibited in kids who develop the so-called failure to launch. Early adulthood, late adolescence and early adulthood is kind of a favorite topic of mine. I wrote a book chapter about it a few years ago in Salman Akhtar's book called Arrogance. The chapter is called Defensive Arrogance in Adult Philanderers. About a few guys I treated who were cheating on their wives, but this particular character disturbance was not due to psychopathy, which you would think it might be, but it was due to a defensive character structure that evolved to handle overwhelming affects that occurred during a trauma with somebody of the opposite gender in their late teens or early 20s. So we'll have some fun talking about that. That's a very interesting topic. It comes up very, very frequently and has an effect on many people's lives. that's an overview of the course. I thank Dr. Rosensfit for asking me to provide this course. We'll look especially at the questions that have to be asked of parents about each developmental stage when you're evaluating them, when you evaluate the child, and the particular techniques that you should be using when you're evaluating a child at each developmental stage, and the theory behind them. So I'm looking forward to teaching the course. I hope you're interested. If you are, I look forward to seeing you there. As they say in Chinese, hui to jian. See you then.